This episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast with Christian Ponder is presented by Compassion International, the most trusted child development ministry in the world. Check out fillthestadium.com to learn how you can help release kids and their family from dire situations in this pandemic and release them from poverty. Check out fillthestadium.com.
Welcome to Sports Spectrum, where we bring Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, former ESPN producer, Jason Romano.
And welcome everyone to the show. I am Jason. This is the Sports Spectrum podcast, where we bring Jesus back into the conversation and we try to keep Jesus into the sports conversation. We're so glad that you tuned into the show today. You can check out our website, sportspectrum.com, for all of our content, including devotionals, articles, stories on the intersection of sports and faith. And of course, all of our podcasts are there on the Sports Spectrum Podcast Network, right there at sportspectrum.com. And when you're there, make sure you click that newsletter icon at the top. It's a great way to stay in touch with all that we have here at Sports Spectrum by signing up for our Sports Spectrum newsletter. It's free. You just go to the website, you put your email address in, and you'll get one email per week from us. So we won't spam you, I promise you, and send you one email per week updating you on the latest stories, articles, podcasts, devotionals that you may have missed, all for free right here at Sports Spectrum and sportspectrum.com. You can sign up right there. Just click that newsletter icon at sportspectrum.com. Got a great conversation today with Christian Ponder, the former NFL quarterback, selected 12th overall in the first round of the 2011 NFL Draft by the Minnesota Vikings. Of course, Christian Ponder was recruited by the late Bobby Bowden at Florida State, played college football there and excelled there for many years, came into the NFL as a first-round pick and played 4 seasons with the Vikings, leading them to the playoffs back in 2012. Played a couple more seasons with Oakland and Denver, then with San Francisco, and his career was pretty much over at the age of 29 years old. And so Christian Ponder now, a few years later, having been out of the league now for 5 years, joins us today to talk about growing up, the pressures of football, certainly playing for Bobby Bowden and what that time was like playing at Florida State and the impact Coach Bowden had on his life. Retiring from the NFL at such a young age, I mean, you're 30 years old, and everything you've done and worked for in terms of football is now in the rearview mirror. What do you do? How do you adjust to life after football? And then, of course, Christian is married to Samantha Ponder, the ESPN NFL host. She hosts Sunday NFL Countdown, and she has a very large platform in the media and sports space. So I asked Christian, what was that like to, and what is that like to be married to someone who has a very popular platform and a very large influence on a lot of people in social media, a lot of people watching her. And how do you handle that as a husband when you see the trolls in the social media world saying things, coming at your wife, and how do you handle that in a Christ-like way? Christian also has a great testimony of faith in Jesus, and he shares that today on the show as well. Gonna give you a heads up here. Christian and I taped this podcast just a few days before Coach Bowden had passed away in early August, and Christian and I were both at a conference in Utah, so we were able to tape this interview in person. But we did record this just a few days before Coach Bowden had succumbed to pancreatic cancer at the age of 91. But Christian Ponder was fantastic. I think you'll really like what he has to say as he joins us today on Sports Spectrum. Take a listen. It's good to have you on, man. It's been, I saw 5 years since you retired, which when I look back at that 2016, the last time you played a game, I was like, wow, I can't believe it's been 5 years since he was in the NFL. Yeah. Do you think about playing a lot still at this point, at this stage of your life?
I honestly, I don't. I think when I miss the game, it's usually when I'm watching college football more than the NFL. But, you miss the competitiveness. You miss the team, right? You miss – look, it's part of your identity for so long, right? Obviously, everyone's going to miss that. I don't – when I was done, I had the opportunity to keep playing, But at that point in my life, multiple factors, I mean, having kids at the point in my career where we're going to be bouncing around from year to year, most likely. It was, to me, I was at peace of like, no, I'm going to be done and try to figure out the next thing. And so now 5 years later of trying to figure out what's next, I'm finally, hopefully, on to what's next. But yeah, it was a lot of processing and figuring out what was next when football was done. It was caught me off guard a little bit because on paper, right, I got my MBA at Florida State. I thought I knew what I was going to do when I was done, and it was still difficult for me, and I was unprepared. I much more so mentally than I thought I was, and emotionally than I thought I was going to be. And thank God for my wife, who helped me walk through a lot of things. But yeah, the transition is real, and it's a difficult thing for a lot of people.
You said you thought you knew what you wanted to do. What did you think you knew?
Yeah, I thought so. I got my undergrad in finance and my MBA, and I thought I always had like this interest in the stock market when I was a kid, and my dad was kind of in the financial world, and so I thought I would just go right in like wealth management, focusing on athletes. And as I started pursuing that, and actually had like a job offer in Phoenix for wealth management, started like, oh, maybe I should get my CFA and all these things, and just it didn't feel right. And not necessarily that's a criteria for a job. It doesn't have to feel right. I wasn't passionate about it. And then we moved to New York City for my wife's job, and almost joined a hedge fund there, and ended up not working out. And then got introduced to the venture capital world, funny enough, through my daughter's best friend in school's dad. Runs like a venture lab, design lab, is in that space, introduced me to that world, and fell in love with venture capital, and with entrepreneurship. I think there's so much crossover between entrepreneurship and being an athlete, and that kind of found my new passion.
That's interesting. I wonder about retiring or kind of transferring out of the NFL or to a pro career. Identity is a common topic that we talk about, especially in the faith world, especially on this show, with a lot of athletes trying to figure out who they are and whose they are. And that's always a struggle for a lot of people. Yeah. For you, was that a struggle, the identity issue of being a football player, Christian Ponder, the quarterback that you were probably since you were a little kid, all the way through college, the NFL, and then suddenly it's not there anymore? Yeah.
Look, I really thought about this. I walked through this kind of 3-year long self-discovery process, which I think everyone needs to do, at whatever point they are in their life. Like, you need to know yourself, especially if we're talking about athletes. Know yourself beyond being an athlete, right? Like, you know yourself so well in the realm and the scope of sport, right? You're always watching film of yourself. You have coaches telling you what you're doing well, what you need to improve on. And you have to know yourself even better away from the field or the court or whatever sport you're in. And I didn't know. I knew myself, again, so well as a football player, and my identity was tied in sport. And obviously you lose that when you're gone. So my thesis on this crisis that athletes face when they're done playing comes down to 4 things. 4 losses you have. The first 2 really go together, and it's what you're talking about. It's identity and purpose. Yeah. And to reach the highest level of sport, collegiately, professionally, you have to put all your eggs into one basket, right? Your identity has to be – it doesn't have to be. We tend to tie it specifically to sport and to our performance. And so we're so narrowly focused on one thing that when we're done, we obviously lose that part of ourselves, but then we don't know what are my interests outside of sport? What are my strengths outside of sport? What are my weaknesses outside of sport? And it's like and so there's some complications there on figuring that out, and so you have to walk through the self-discovery process and your purpose, right? Like, especially for me, growing up and playing high school football in Texas, it was like football is your purpose, right?
Everything.
That is the end itself, and everything else is a means to that end, right? Yeah. Like, I do well in school so I can stay eligible to play football. I take care of my body so I can have peak performance and play it at my best ability. And the problem with that is, that might get you far in the scope of sport, but if your purpose is sport, when sport is over, then your purpose is gone. And so I think too, like, I remember having the FCAs come and talk to us in high school and everything. And it was always like, the talk was always kind of this separation of, you're an athlete, but you're a Christian. And so like, there was almost like this, I'm an athlete, I'm a Christian, or I guess I'm actually a Christian. And they're intertwined, right? They're not separated, right? And so I fell in love with this idea of of this group out of New York City is called Praxis. They believe in this idea of redemptive entrepreneurship, which I think there's so much crossover between being a redemptive athlete and that a business should not be solely about making money. It has to be advancing culture in some way. And so being a redemptive athlete, I'm not playing sport to play sport. I need to realize I'm playing sport for some reason greater than the sport itself. And right, as believers, we are on mission, right? We are on a team associated with these people for a reason. And for collegiate and professional athletes, you have a platform for a reason. And how do you leverage that to advance the gospel, right? Like we have two purposes in life, to love and serve God and to love our neighbor.
That's right.
And that love your neighbor umbrella, there's an infinite amount of possibilities that you can leverage sport to serve your neighbor in that way. And so so when I find my purpose in that, my purpose is still existing when I'm done, right? My purpose doesn't end when sport's over. I'm still loving and serving God, and I'm still loving and serving my neighbor, even though sport is done.
He is Christian Ponder. He's joining us here on Sports Spectrum. That's good stuff, man. I want to go back a little bit, too, because we're kind of going forward and, post-NFL career to where you are now. But I think it's important to also hear the journey a little bit. And for you grew up in Dallas, in Grapevine, actually, right? And so football, I imagine, and I think you told me this earlier, that your dad was a football player as well. So I have to imagine football was in the blood from the beginning.
Yeah, it was. And specifically Florida State football, right? Like grew up in Texas, and obviously football's a religion down there. And both my parents went to Florida State. My dad played at Florida State for Coach Bowden, which I had the privilege of doing as well. And,
that's right.
And so we watched, and it was funny because we primarily, and this is maybe why I miss college football more than the NFL. We were a college football family. Right? We watched Florida State. We didn't necessarily watch the Cowboys every Sunday, but we were watching every Florida State game. And so football, and look, I grew up playing all sports, and it's funny, actually, my first experience playing football, I don't know, it was Pee-wee. I hated it. Like I wanted to be the quarterback. The coach's son was the quarterback. I was tight end. No one's throwing the ball, so you're just an extra offensive lineman, and I hated it. Yeah. And our coach was, not the highest character guy in the world. And so my dad actually surprisingly let me quit halfway through the season. And baseball was my sport growing up. And then when I got to high school, it was clear that my ceiling in football was much higher than baseball. And so kind of made the decision, okay, we'll focus on football. And fortunately that worked out to a certain extent. But it was football kind of all day, sports all day, every day. And again, I think it goes back to the identity, like the identity and the performance was so tied into football. But that was the way that I connected with my dad. And, I had two brothers. I was the middle and was always playing outside together. And there's just a lot of memories around that.
Did you feel pressure, though, because you came from a football family in Florida State to, perform and, prove yourself to your dad? Yeah,
absolutely. I think, when I was done playing, going through this process of unpacking a lot of things. And, so I played, and I would probably say this was the biggest limitation to my professional career, or my biggest stumbling block was I just had so much anxiety and such a lack of confidence. But anxiety really rooted in finding value based off my performance, right? And having the pressure of pleasing my dad on the field and pleasing everyone else, and really just kind of putting on my shoulders hey, my relationship with my dad is dependent on how I perform. He never told me that, obviously, but I think, for some reason I put that on my shoulders. And so I ended up carrying that into professional sports and not really even seeing my dad. It was now everyone's my dad, right? And I need to please everybody, and expecting perfection, and anything less than perfection was terrible. I remember I could throw 4 touchdowns in a game, and and 1 interception, and we turn that film on the next day, if we win, I have so much anxiety of just watching that 1 interception. Wow. And so it's funny, and again, I think it's so important for people to go through the self-discovery process and unpack things. And I went this 3-year journey of unpacking a lot of this myself, and with the help of my wife, and through books and people much smarter than me. I got to the point where I had a plateau of no, I need some help professionally now. And so now going through this with a counselor, and really, and I was it would have been so helpful to do this while I was still playing, but it's a gift. Everyone needs to do it. I know you're passionate about it. And just this idea of this counselor's talking the process of you have unprocessed wounds that you need to walk through, but unprocessed wounds lead to distorted perspectives, and distorted perspectives lead to disruptive emotions, and disruptive emotions lead to dysfunctional lifestyle choices, right? And so I was making these dysfunctional lifestyle choices because of a insecurity rooted that was created a long time ago in childhood that I didn't even know. Like growing up, I was shy. I didn't have the verbiage of insecure, and it was all insecurity. And I'm talking a lot right now, but like I have a theory on life, and if we all solve this, I think we'll be much better off. But like,
Yeah.
If you look back, like I'll talk about me. If I look back on my life and my biggest regrets, right, the things that I did that I wish I did not do, or the things I didn't do that I wish I did, if I trace the root of that, it's always insecurity, right? Like I didn't do the things that I should have or wanted to do because I was too scared, right? I was too scared to fail or whatever. Or I did the stupid thing that I shouldn't have done because I wanted to be the cool guy, or I wanted to fill some short-term need or want that was rooted in insecurity, right? Like, and so if we can get to, I think that a lot of this unprocessing or this processing and unpacking has to do with getting to the root of a certain insecurity that is leading to a lot of issues for all of us. Like we're all broken people. We all have insecurities. And I think when you realize that, it's really empowering, and you see God come in and his providence and healing those wounds, and it just creates a much more intimate relationship. I mean, he's a loving God that cares about you and cares about these wounds, and he wants you to process and unpack these things.
Man, there's so much there because, we were talking earlier about then we get married and we bring our baggage or our past into a marriage, and the person you marry brings that, whatever their past is, and everybody has it. Some are not as bad as others, but then you got to kind of coexist in a marriage, and then you bring kids into the picture, and you got to figure out, okay, what kind of dad do I want to be? There's just a lot there.
Yeah. I think when we had that chat before, it was based on this. So I read this book. My really this kind of self-discovery process for me started with this book that my in-laws got my wife and I think for Christmas. And it's called How We Love. I can't remember the name of the author. He's a Christian psychologist, but it's this idea of kind of the things, for lack of a better term, the baggage that we have from our childhood that we got from our parents because of their childhood, right? We take into our marriage and our insecurities and our dysfunctions. Like we both have, like a husband and wife both have them. And so you need to understand that, like you need to know what those things are so you can process and you can heal those things. And obviously then, like, look, I'm going to create baggage with my kids, right? Like we're not perfect, but at least we can be aware of like, hey, I don't want to screw up too bad. Right. And obviously you can be the best parent in the world and things are going to happen. But right, like again, like just that self-discovery, that knowledge is so powerful. The wisdom, I guess, I should say, is much a more powerful word. But like the wisdom of self-discovery and understanding is really important.
Let's take a quick break from our conversation here on Sports Spectrum to tell you a little bit more about our friends at Compassion International, releasing children from poverty in Jesus' name. They are the most trusted child development ministry in the world, and it's a company and an organization and a partner of Sports Spectrum that we value so much. And the work that they do, when I tell you how important it is, I'm not sugarcoating it here. It's incredibly important work, releasing kids from poverty, but doing it in Jesus' name, teaching these kids who are stuck in really dire situations about how they can accept Christ and have a relationship with Jesus. That's the most important thing, but they do it with compassion and through Compassion's programs. Now, due to COVID-19, 70,000 kids last year and their families in Compassion programs were stuck potentially without a sponsorship and are in need of your urgent support. Now, 70,000 is the capacity of the average pro football stadium. And since we've launched Fill the Stadium and their Compassion program a year and a half ago, we've seen almost 58,000 seats filled with Compassion's program. You guys have come through. I'm telling you, every seat representing a child in need, and we're close to 60,000 seats. So our goal is very much in reach of helping 70,000 kids and their families. But we're not there yet. So we need your help. It's almost to the end, but we have to keep pushing here to help these kids. There's still 10,000 children out there who need your help. your help providing essential food and medical care and support for a child and their family during this ongoing pandemic. Help restore what COVID-19 destroyed by going to fillthestadium.com and donating today. Any amount helps. Fillthestadium.com. This is a stadium that cannot remain empty. Fillthestadium.com. At what point, because you grew up in Texas and in the South, so I'm guessing church and faith and Christ was at least around in your home. It might have been very prevalent, but at some point you have to invite Jesus into your life and kind of make him not just Savior, but Lord. Take me through that process of your faith journey when you finally say, yeah, I got to get serious about this whole thing.
Yeah, I grew up Catholic, and so like went to church every Sunday, took communion, did my first communion, got confirmed in the Catholic Church. But I didn't see, and this is my personal story. This is not a knock on the Catholic Church at all. In my personal experience, it was, very much kind of leaning more religious than relationship for me. And so I didn't have an intimate relationship with Jesus. I met a guy, or I didn't meet a guy. So this guy in college, he worked in the video department for Florida State. His name was Scott Kodak. And he had the same story. He grew up in the Catholic Church, and he left the Catholic Church, and he saw his faith flourish. And so he kind of took me under his wing as kind of a mentor, and like forced me into doing these Bible studies like every Wednesday, once a week, but started planting seeds on like maybe you should think about this and exploring other things. And like I never grew up reading the Bible, right? Like I went and heard the word on Sunday, and that was it. And just like the emphasis of like pursuing God. He's pursuing you. You need to pursue God, and specifically in his word and through prayer. Like for my prayer life, it was I prayed at bed, at night before bed, and that was it. Right. And so it was always structured. And
or
so,
before dinner, right?
Yeah. And so like incorporating God, like prayer at every minute of the day, like just having it doesn't have to be so formal, just have conversations. And really started planting these seeds. And then I don't know, 2012 I left the Catholic Church, really with kind of as I got in a deep relationship with my wife, really started taking things more seriously, and really I came to Christ through that. I put off baptism for a long time. I was like, I was already baptized in the Catholic Church. Like I didn't need
as a baby.
Yeah,
same here.
And finally, I can't even remember, what was it, in 2017, 16? I can't remember the date, which is not good. But we became, actually it's probably later. It's probably 2017. We became friends with this new pastor. His name was Noe Garcia at this church in Phoenix that was right down the street with us. We became really close, and I was like, I had him and Jon Kitna and my father-in-law come over to our house, and I had Noah. I was like, man, I need to get baptized. So he baptized us in our pool in the backyard. Wow. And I just felt like I needed to do that. Like that was a step in my faith journey that I needed to make this public confession. And it had been wrestling in my heart for a long time that I needed to do this. And so, look, it hasn't been a straight line since then, right? It's ebbed and flowed, and but it's definitely, I'm reading this book now. It's really short, called The Cure. And he paints this picture, the author paints this picture about that once you accept Jesus, you don't need to change because you're already changed. You just need to mature, right? And he talks about this picture of someone dissecting a caterpillar and seeing its DNA, and the DNA being the DNA of a full-fledged butterfly. But it's a caterpillar. But the DNA inside, it's just that caterpillar needs to mature into a butterfly. And that's us, right? Yeah. Like it's already inside of us. It doesn't need to, we're already changed. We just have to mature. And so for me, it's just the maturation process. I am saved. Now it's that sanctification, maturation process that I still have to go through. And look, it never ends, right? And for me, it's like, just trying to gain as much wisdom from God's word and from people who are much wiser than me is, it's a constant journey.
How much of an impact was your wife in that too? I mean, you've kind of alluded to it, and we had Sam on the show maybe 3 years ago, and she shared her testimony, which goes back quite a bit to growing up in a home and going on missions trips when she was little. Yeah. So coming into a relationship with her, I imagine she was a pretty big, important part of your spiritual growth.
Yeah, huge. And there was, which was obviously great. There was also conflict there, right? Like, as a man needing to be the spiritual leader of the home, she was much far, like she had gone to solid food much other than I was still on milk,
Yeah.
And so there was a learning process there, or there was an adjustment, and but man, like her influence, like it's probably the most influential person spiritually on my life than anyone that I've had and been in relationship with, and so that like she's had and has had an eternal impact on me.
Tell the story from your perspective, and I'll link to the podcast we did with Sam, and she told the story of how you guys met and got married in a very quick time frame here.
Yes.
And many thought, oh my gosh, what are they doing? It's so quick. And you were still playing in the NFL at the time. I think you were only in your second year, if I'm not mistaken. And that was actually turned out to be a pretty good year. I think the Vikings went to the playoffs that year and everything.
Yeah.
Tell the story, if you could, from your perspective.
Yeah. So I'll try to make it quick. So I saw her this was in the spring before that season. I saw her on TV. Thought she was attractive.
Sure.
Knew she was a Christian. I tweeted at her. I made up some baloney story about, she was working for Longhorn Network at the time.
That's right.
And so she was living in Austin, Texas, growing up in Dallas. I had the Texas connection. I had a friend who played at University of Texas, and he had talked about, oh, you should come down to Austin for the off season. That's where you should live. We can train together, whatever. And so I tweeted at her, like I actually needed her advice. Hey, I've got a buddy that wants me to live in Austin. What do you think of it? And she replied to me, and there was like a couple tweets back and forth. I found out she had a boyfriend. I stopped pursuing her.
Right.
And then I think someone told me they broke up, and so this was like right, I think in training camp. We ended up, I tweeted it at her, and then she ended up direct messaging me, like saying like, you can't tweet at me anymore publicly because like it's not like I work in football, like it's not a good look.
Right, and so you're a quarterback in the NFL, so everybody can see this.
Yeah. And she's in college football. Like she wasn't working in the NFL at the time.
Yeah,
and
but she's still a personal, a public figure.
Yeah, absolutely. She was embarrassed.
Yeah,
and but I took it as like she direct messaged me, like I'm good. Like this is great. And so I don't know. We direct message. We exchanged numbers. We FaceTime all throughout training camp. Like at night when we're done, like I'm FaceTiming her. After the fourth preseason game, you get that weekend off, right? Labor Day weekend. That's the start of football season. She just got the game day job. Coincidentally, her first show was in Dallas at Cowboy Stadium. So I fly back to quote unquote see my parents, and so we meet then on September 1st. We hang out. I drive her down to Austin. We hang out in Austin for a day. I have to go back. She flies up a few times on Mondays and Tuesdays. And we got engaged December 2nd and married December 17th, thinking we got married secretly. Why we're going to rush, I don't know. Love is stupid sometimes, right?
Sure.
Like, it doesn't make sense. And she was not pregnant, which a lot of people assume. There was no pregnancy.
She said that too.
Yeah. But so my thought process, like, we're going to have the secret wedding right now on a Tuesday on an off day during the season. We're going to drive to Wisconsin. We take the first exit in Wisconsin, which, is 30 minutes outside of Minneapolis. But I'm like, if we go to Wisconsin, no one will know who I am. And, I'm the starting quarterback for the Vikings at that point. And so we go to this town. We get married in this courthouse. Our plan was we're going to get secretly married. No one will know. We'll have a wedding in the spring in the off season back in Phoenix. And that everyone think like, we're getting married. And, of course, that night I get a message from a beat reporter being like, hey, I heard you got married at the courthouse. I was like, what?
How do they know?
I know. It wasn't a good sign when the lady was like asking for me like for my autograph at the courthouse. Oh. So like I got to call my mom because she doesn't know, it's like going to be out in the news. And now it's like we're going on 9 years with 3 kids.
9 years?
9 years. 9 years in December, so.
After 2 weeks of being engaged.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good Christmas and a pretty good year, right? You went to the playoffs that year.
Yeah.
What was that like trying to turn from getting married to play a football game on Sunday? That must be
but it wasn't a big deal.
Yeah,
but it wasn't like we went to a courthouse, we were there for like an hour, and then we went home, right? Like it wasn't obviously marriage, and this was probably just us being naive and young and just not thinking through everything. Like obviously it's a huge decision.
Yeah.
In our minds it was like, let's just go do this, whatever, and fortunately that's probably not I wouldn't suggest that to anyone, but it's worked out. And so it wasn't like I didn't feel extra pressure. It was it didn't really affect me. And obviously we ended up beating Green Bay the last game of the year to go in the playoffs, and I actually got hurt and didn't play in the playoff games, but
that's right. I remember that.
Yeah, it was a good year.
That was a good year. I do want to ask you about Bobby Bowden, kind of bouncing around a little bit. because there's obviously a lot going on with Coach Bowden, and he's in the news and he's getting up there, and we don't know how much longer he has, but you named your first daughter after him.
Yeah.
So clearly he had a huge impact on you. Can you kind of share a little bit about what it was like to be around such a legend? Really, I spent like 45 minutes at ESPN one time talking to him and listening, really not talking, just because there was so much wisdom coming from this man. I have to imagine that was what it was like being around him for the many years you were.
It was. He, probably the most influential person in college football, specific to, a relationship with Jesus Christ, right? Like, he led, even for my dad, like, so the legacy starts with my dad and him really being a father figure to my dad. And then for me, hearing about Coach Bowden and going to games and meeting Coach Bowden, wanting to play for this man, and just one of the most selfless people, was on mission, right? Like, he knew, look, he was one of the greatest coaches of all time in college football, but he was on mission. It was never about football. It was about leading all these men coming through Florida State to Christ. And he was unashamed. He was very open about it, and he had a eternal impact on so many people that came through that program. And just so thankful for my family before I had kids, and then obviously now growing up and having my own kids. And it's funny, it was my wife's decision to name our daughter, who we call Scout, but her legal name's Bowden. It was her decision to do that, and I think she just realized the impact that Coach Bowden had on me, that it was important for us to kind of carry on that legacy. And just so thankful to be a part of that and being a part of his last season at Florida State. I really hope, like, obviously Doak Campbell Stadium is an iconic stadium. I really hope it becomes Bobby Bowden Stadium, because he deserves an honor like that.
Yeah, I would not argue with that if they made that change, for sure. I don't think anybody would. What's your favorite Coach Bowden story? Like, in a game when you're playing, do you have one?
I don't know.
There's probably so many.
Look, I just love, like, when he got fired up, right? Like, he rarely ever cussed. It was like, that gummit. Like, but, like, I think my greatest story is, honestly, like, I remember, so this was before I ever played for Coach Bowden. I was in 7th grade. I might have been older than that. My dad had this reunion. It must have been, I don't know, his 20th reunion, or whatever it was, for his team that he played at Florida State with. And so he took me, and I was interested in football. Like, I was starting to realize that maybe I have a potential here. And so I got to meet Coach Bowden the night before the game. And I remember I shook his hand. He spent time, like, there's, hundreds of people there. He spent 5 minutes with me, talking to me, and just grabbing, he asked me what I did. I said, I play football. I'm a quarterback at the middle school team, whatever. And he, like, grabbed my right arm. He's like, you know what? Maybe we could use this arm one day.
Wow. And
I was like, man, like, I want that. I want to play for this man and this coach. And, like, it worked out, obviously. And, I don't know if that's God's provision in this, maybe. And obviously, I guess I can't say maybe. Yes. But so grateful for that opportunity.
That's such a cool story. What a man. And what a legacy. Everybody
Absolutely.
I've talked to that's been around him. You can go down from Coach Mark Richt, who's on this show, Danny Cannell, so many others who said, like, this guy has had an eternal impact on me, not just a temporary impact on this life where, he's a support to me, helped me be a better football player and a better man, but we're talking about eternity.
Absolutely.
And that was his mindset, wasn't it? You saw that when you played with him, right? You played for him.
Yeah. It was, look, he had high expectations on the field, right? He expected you to perform, but it was way beyond that, right? It goes back to that same conversation about kind of being a redemptive athlete. Like, it is about much more than football itself. And I'm sure, look, I as believers, like, we're called to excellence, right? And he probably, look, he had to have, that had to have been a mission. Like, we need to be excellent, and if we are like, for his testimony, like, Florida State was so good under his tutelage that people wanted to play for him, and that meant more people in front of him that he could share God's word with, right? And so He created this, like, ecosystem of, like, church and football, right? Like, in this place where people wanted to be and listen to him. And it was it was the night before game, like, every Friday night he was coming in and he was sharing the word, right, before the game next Saturday, the day after. And that was his priority.
Christian Ponder is our guest here on Sports Spectrum. Just a couple more questions. I do want to ask you about sort of being married to someone with a very large platform and I guess fame and criticism and public scrutiny and things like that just come with the nature of what you did for many years as a quarterback, and then kind of taking a step back, and now your wife's out there on ESPN every Sunday, and people are watching, and I'm sure I can't imagine, and we did talk about it a little bit when she was on the show, just the tweets and the replies and the importance of kind of being healthy in that space, because of if you read those, it'll crush you, but you're also a protective husband too. What was that like for you when you transitioned out of the NFL and suddenly your wife's moving up and having great opportunities at ESPN to, replace Chris Berman and fill in that seat on Sunday Countdown? But then I'm guessing, I know you're on social media, I don't know how much you're on there, but just watching public criticism of your life, that can't be easy.
Yeah, you have to bite your tongue, right? There has to be a lot of restraint. I think you always have the perspective of like, what is this tweet going to cost me, right? And it's usually going to cost me a lot more than swallowing my pride and saying nothing, right? And so, but it is frustrating. I tend to look. Social media is a great tool when used in the right way. Obviously, it also there's a lot of detrimental things in social media, so I think having the wisdom on how to use it and leverage it in the right way, I think, has been a priority for us. But it's hard. It is, but not a week goes by where there's something being typed out that gets just deleted and the phone put away. But it's and look, for my wife, like, so proud of her, and she's so talented, and she's given me the opportunity because of her work to help me, like, going back to earlier in the conversation of like processing and figure out, okay, like, now what's next for me,
right? And
just what a gift that she gave, because that was the plan. She was like, hey. She actually gave me 3 years, and it actually ended up taking longer than 3. But I'm going to give you 3. I'm going to work for 3 years. You can figure out what you're going to do. And so, what a selfless act for her to do that, and just so thankful that she gave me that space to be able to do and process and figure out what's next for me.
And then be able to be a dad too, right?
Yeah,
and to be able to really, you became a dad. I think your career was still going strong when Scout was born, but then retiring and finishing up your pro career and being able to be a dad now to 3 kids. That has to be the coolest job ever for you.
It is. It is. And I'm still a kid at heart. So, like, I have such a childish humor, and like, so like we're on the same level mentally, my kids and I. And so it's been fun. And look, it is hard, right? Parenting is hard.
Absolutely.
But it is so worth it, right? Like, Sam and I always say that it makes the good times so much better, and it makes the hard times harder, but completely worth it. And it's such a miracle of, like, we have such great relationships with our kids, and like, obviously we're parents, but like, we love being with them, and like, just this whole, we always talk about this, like, they didn't exist. If we didn't get married, they wouldn't have existed. And like, how much joy that we find in them. It's just it's one of those miracles of life and of God that, like, and look, and it mimics the relationship that it is a fraction of our relationship with God and how much God loves us. And we know that that's one of the great things, right, about having kids and being married. It's like, I love my kids so much, yet God loves me infinitely more. And that, what an amazing thing.
Yeah, I've told people, because I didn't have a great example for a father, that it was hard for me to see God as Father more than it was to see Jesus as Savior, because I didn't have a father that loved me unconditionally, or at least I didn't feel like that.
Yeah.
But then when I had my daughter, I said, "Oh, now I get it. I get it."
Yeah.
And
it's such
you got it too.
Yeah, it is such a gift, and it's like there's so much. Look, it's stressful. Again, it's hard. But I think one of the best advice we got was from a doctor. It was when Scott was a baby. We had a doctor in Minnesota that basically said, just love them and feed them, right? And you'll figure out the rest.
Yeah.
And that was like, took a weight off of our shoulders. Like, okay, we don't have to do all these planning books or whatever. Like, love them and feed them, and you figure out the rest. And obviously, as a father and a spiritual leader, like, you got to pour into them, and you have to raise disciples in your children. But what a gift of a relationship that is.
So my last question is a question we ask all of our guests, or most of our guests here on the show. What are you learning from God today? Because you've kind of alluded to like this journey and this process of growing in your faith and going from like, a baby to a toddler to, a grown adult and in your faith. But we all learn something every day from God. What's he teaching you and showing you right now?
Yeah. So he is teaching me, I'm on this mission of vulnerability. I actually asked, I went to a PAO event in Colorado where David Platt was preaching, and what a gift that was.
Yeah.
But I asked David, I was like, what is the point of, and I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say this on Sports Spectrum. Why should I go to church? Because I can walk into a church and it feels no different than a country club. And so I've been I'm trying to figure out why, right? And there's so much, again, this goes back to this insecurity conversation, but it's all this facade, right? This masking where we walk into church and we have to act like we're okay. And no, we're not. We're broken people. And the only thing universal, or one of the universal things about humanity, is that we are broken, that we are insecure. And that's why we need Jesus. So why are we hiding that fact, right? Like, we are broken, and our brokenness creates empathy with others. And so, drop the mask and be vulnerable with others. And that's, for me, that. I want to lead that. Vulnerability begets vulnerability. And so I see it, God wants me to be vulnerable with others and admit, man, I am an insecure, broken human. I care too much about what people think of me. I care too much about performance. I have deep-rooted insecurities, and that's everyone. We all are insecure, and so I think kind of bearing the weight of I want to lead that. We need to be vulnerable because that creates the space of healing, right? God comes in and heals that with others, right? We can't. Community is only so deep if you can't be vulnerable, right? It doesn't go deep enough, and we are in this era of faux community via social media. And this loneliness epidemic, because it's all a facade, right? Just be real with people, and there's that's how you build community. That's love, right? Love is in the vulnerability, and I see that. That's what God teaches me. Just drop the mask.
It's such a fine line though between vulnerability and oversharing.
Yeah.
Because that vulnerability, I'm guessing for you, Christian, doesn't mean you're sharing it with everybody.
Yeah, for sure.
Because not everybody is in that circle enough to hear that, but it's finding the right people to be vulnerable with, right?
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. Look, because being vulnerable with the wrong people will just lead to more pain, right? And so finding those people, those safe people that you can build relationship and be in community with is so, so important. And I think there's a lot of people that are lonely right now and don't have that community. And so you need to make that a priority and find those people out. And if you know someone who fits that description, go be with them, right? Put them under your wing, be vulnerable with them so they can be vulnerable with you, and make sure it's a safe space, and let God do his thing.
It reminds me of my friend Steve Carter, who I know you know, whose new book is, we'll give him a plug here, The Thing Beneath the Thing, which is really what we're talking about here with vulnerability, getting below the surface and getting below the thing that everybody sees and get a little bit deeper.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Christian, thanks, buddy. Thanks for being on the show. I really appreciate you, and hopefully we'll get you back on.
Yeah, sounds good, Jason. Thanks, man.
And many thanks to Christian Ponder for joining us here today on Sports Spectrum. He has a great story, and certainly wish him nothing but the best in life after football, and just love what he had to say about honoring and cherishing his wife, Sam. Loved what he had to say about life after football and finding purpose and significance. Certainly loved the stories of meeting the late coach Bobby Bowden, and just a lot of fun talking to Christian. Really appreciate him joining us here today on Sports Spectrum. We also thank you as well for tuning in. Make sure you check out our website, sportspectrum.com, for all of our content, articles, stories, podcasts, all available at the website for free at sportspectrum.com. And whatever app that you're listening to this podcast on, do us a quick favor. Make sure you click that subscribe button to follow us and know all of what's happening here at Sports Spectrum and never miss an episode. So subscribing allows you, when you go to your podcast app, wherever it is, Spotify or Apple, the podcast will show up right in your feed if you subscribe. And that's the best way to stay in touch with all that we have here at Sports Spectrum's podcast, dropping 2 to 3 new stories and new conversations every single week. So don't miss it. Subscribe today to Sports Spectrum's podcast anywhere your podcasts are found. And join us next time for a brand new episode here on Sports Spectrum's podcast. It's so good to have the NFL back, and it was great to talk to Christian Ponder today about his journey in college, into the NFL, and now into his life after football. Tune in next time, and we'll see you guys here on Sports Spectrum. Have a great rest of your day, and please do stay safe.